let's suppose as a predator you get far enough into this that you've slashed your prices and you've withstood the war and everybody else has now left the market. Now it's time to cash in. Okay, assuming you could even get that far with this. Now it's time to raise your price. If you never raised your price, if you always keep it down there and you always are producing enough to satisfy demand and keep it from going to another competitor, and if that's where it ends, I would say, how do consumers get hurt by that? That's a kind of a permanent gift. But the idea here is to be able to raise your prices back up again, not just to where they were before, but hopefully to some point even higher, now in a market devoid of competition. If Rockefeller had tried this in 1890 at his very peak, if he had been successful at driving 66 other firms out of business and now began to raise his prices again, what would that do as a signal to competition? If 66 firms were willing to compete with him when the price was here, how many will want to compete with him if it's up here? And some of these could be the former competitors who just shut down for the duration, or maybe sold out and somebody else picks them up for a song and at very low capital costs can start up and compete. It's awfully problematic that this could somehow could work. And what a predator would typically find is the moment he starts to cash in by raising his price, somebody else jumps in again and so, oh, got to slash my price again, or I drive him out. And then he goes and then he raises the price again. Oh, there's another one. And it's just a never-ending effort to try to keep people out of the market, which is extraordinarily difficult to do as long as markets are free, as long as government doesn't come in and bestow any special advantages or make it harder for newcomers to start business, that kind of thing. So these so-called beaten firms themselves may reopen and at the higher price find that it's now attractive for them to get back in the business. So McGee pointed out that this really is more easily said than done. And Gabriel Kolko in his book pointed out that he couldn't find any examples where this worked. And the empirical record suggests that it was not the case in the oil business during the time that Rockefeller was growing. A second charge is that Rockefeller bought out his competitors. You always see this in the history text too. And in fact, you may have seen that famous cartoon of Rockefeller picking the buds off a rose bush, you know, and this is the idea where here's a budding competitor, what's he do? He picks them off. He buys them, absorbs them. Now they're part of Standard instead of a competitor in a free market. If a large firm decides that it wants to embark on a policy of eliminating competition by buying it wherever it appears, it's like hanging out a sign, competitors wanted, because that's exactly what they'll get. In fact, there was a guy named Daniel P. Reighard who worked for Rockefeller for a time and later left Standard Oil and built and sold 3 successive refineries to Rockefeller, each time saying, well, I got a refinery here. I don't know whether I should start it up and produce stuff or what will you give me for it? Rockefeller bought him 3 times, 3 refineries that he built. There's lots of evidence that Standard grew through acquisition and an entirely natural and explainable development in a market that was littered with people, large and small, thousands of oil producers, some of whom never really intended to be in the business long enough to get rich quick and be gone. And so he bought up a lot of facilities. But the question is, did he buy them because they made good economic sense, or did he buy them as part of this quest to eliminate competition? Because if he was operating under the latter assumption, he clearly failed. He never eliminated competition. There was competition all over the place, not only in the U.S., but from all over the world. The Russians had discovered oil in Baku, and they were online producing huge amounts of refined oil products for the world market. The idea that Rockefeller could just stamp out competition everywhere just by buying it, and that would be the end of it, is really rather absurd. If he had bought all 66 competitors in 1890, do you think the day afterwards, do you think there wouldn't be another 66 lining up to say, hey, why don't you buy me? Then I don't have to bother to take the risk and go into the production business. I'll just sell you the refinery. So I think this charge is a red herring too. And it doesn't stack up to all the other measures of competition that we see: falling prices, increasing production, the world being inundated with improving quality refined oil products at falling prices. Standard's own market share falling after this brief period of 90%. The third charge is collusion and conspiracy to raise and fix prices. Collusion and conspiracy to raise and fix prices. It's interesting when you think of it, the same guy's accused of all these things. You know, what did he do? Did he prey on his competitors? Did he sit down and buy them? Or did he sit down and make deals with them and conspire? I mean, the same guy gets hit with all these charges of trying to monopolize the market. Remember that the price record ought to tell us something about whether collusion and conspiracy to raise prices was attempted and whether or not it was successful, because you would expect to see price spikes, but there are none in this period. Prices steadily falling, production steadily increasing, quality of the product steadily improving throughout this period. So the record doesn't seem to support this, but I want to offer some economic reasons why these agreements to conspire and collude tend to fall apart. And if this interests you at all, I would urge you to take a look at Kolko's book, The Triumph of Conservatism, because he goes, every chapter is about a different industry, and he explains that there were attempts sometimes by entrepreneurs who had been a little frustrated by this competition springing up everywhere, wanting to bring order to the market and wanting to get together with the others and see if they could agree to keep prices high. There were attempts, but Kolko said, but they fell apart as quickly as it took for the ink to dry. And here's why. Let's imagine that I'm Rockefeller and you're my competitors and we're at a secret hideaway, and our purpose, I've called you all together because, you know, we're all racked by this competitive problem here. Every time anybody thinks they can get their price up, somebody else undercuts them. And so wouldn't it be nice if we could all agree to not do that? Well, what's the first problem we have to solve if our intent is to raise and fix prices? What do we have to do with regard to production? Well, how about more narrowly, production? If we want to get a higher price, yeah, we have to cut production. We can't be flooding the market with as much as we have been and expect that all of that to sell at a higher price. Somebody will get stuck with unsold inventories. So we have to agree to restrict production by some formula so that the higher price sticks. And so being the guy that called us all together, I make the first suggestion. I say, well, I think it'd be fair if we just all cut by 10% across the board. 10% less output, and that'll enable us to get a higher price. Are you all going to say, oh, sure, that sounds fair? Because you're all in a very different, everyone in a very unique position. Some of you are new to the business, others have very different cost structures and what have you. And you're all going to be thinking, wait a minute, 10% for him, that's like 2% for me. That'd be about the same because I'm smaller and he has so many more advantages and what have you. So you're all going to say, well, okay, John D., you cut by 10, but that's really equal to about a 2% for me and 3% for me and what have you. Remember, all of us, if we think the price is going up, we have an incentive to keep production high, right? So we have more to sell at the higher price. So it's going to be very difficult to arrive at some formula that we're all going to agree to restrict output. But let's suppose we do that. Somehow we arrive at a formula, we all agree we're going to restrict our production by a certain amount or amounts. What's the first thing that the smartest of us is going to do when we leave the room? Well, I'm going to hope that you suckers all stick to what you agreed to. I'm going to hope that you cut your production, and I'll say, yep, I'm cutting mine, thank you very much, we got a deal. And I'm going to head for the first phone, and I'm going to call your customers, and I'm going to say, you're going to soon hear about a higher price. Keep this between us. But if you buy from me now, I'll give you a discount. Why wouldn't I do that? The very reason why we got together in the first place was what? Higher profits. Now that we have an agreement, how do you make higher profits? You break the agreement, right? It's you don't suddenly lose the profit motive when you have a new arrangement here. Now, if you really want to make money and you've got this secret agreement, the way to make more is to cheat. Cheat on this secret agreement by working the customers of your competitors. And so all that has to happen is for somebody to lose a customer for any reason, and somebody's going to say, I smell a rat. And before long, there's an attempt, of course, by many of us to meet that problem by cutting or increasing our production, cutting our price. The agreement falls apart. That's why Coco found in his book that, yeah, a lot of these guys, they thought they were smart. They'd get the competitors together, and they thought that they were a lot of dummies, and he could talk them into agreeing to this sort of thing, fully intending, before the agreement was even signed, to break it at the earliest opportunity. Where the typical history text falls short is they just tell you that there were attempts. They don't tell you anything about the competitive forces at work that broke them apart. They just think it was an evil thing to try, but they never give the market any credit for making sure they didn't work. Coco, a socialist historian, says that's the way it happened. The economy was becoming more competitive, less monopolistic in spite of these attempts because the market was so, the winds of competition were so powerful. That's really one reason why these tend to break apart, and we sometimes call that internal pressures. We've got this agreement, and internal to the agreement itself, just the parties involved, there's great pressure to break the agreement. But let's suppose we are such people of such high standards and people of our word that nobody cheats. Everybody sticks to the agreement. Everybody says, oh, no, I know I can make more money if I cheated, but no, I put my word on the line. I'm going to forego the chance to make more money and stick to this agreement, help my competitors. Let's suppose we're that type of person. Well, now what kind of pressure might we face? External pressures. People who aren't party to the agreement. They may be people who aren't even in our business at the moment. They could be startup entrepreneurs. They could be huge companies making something different but see an opportunity. And in fact, the higher the price we've agreed to, the greater the attraction for somebody else outside the agreement to enter the business. Now, what are we going to, we're going to have another meeting. And because to handle this guy, what do we do now? We can break his arm, but you know, the chances are the cops will find out and we'll go to jail for that. Well, we can sit down with him and try to talk him into being a part of our agreement. Well, why would he want to do that? It's the fact that we've got one that he's making money. Well, and if we did succeed at convincing him to be a part of our secret agreement, all we've got is one more potential cheater on our hands. And what do we do when the next guy turns around? So this is, again, it's just like sand slipping through your fingers. It's a lot easier said than done. It's not going to stick. Through internal pressures and external pressures, these things tend to break apart. Now, we've seen this on a world scale with OPEC over the years. And I would argue that with OPEC, you had even additional advantages that would suggest they could possibly make something like this work because they're all government cartels. And they could always tax their people to death if they have to make up for losses in the oil business, whereas a private company can't do that. And yet OPEC gets undercut all the time. The last really huge round of price increases before the recent ones, remember back in the 70s, what did those higher prices do? Well, they brought new countries online, North Sea oil from Britain and Venezuela and some Indonesia oil and so forth, and which in time broke the back of OPEC, and we were getting $10 oil for quite a while. I have every reason to believe that high oil prices today are having some of that same effect. We will not see the full effect of it perhaps for a time, but you can bet the higher prices are causing a lot of people to say, this alternative now may be feasible. Let's bring it online, or let's dig a little deeper because at that price it's affordable to find oil in deeper places. What's necessary to make that all happen is for the market to be left alone, for there to be freedom to take advantage of these high prices and harness the power of incentive to produce more, find alternatives, and what have you. The same sorts of forces that were in work that took us from whale oil to crude oil in the first place. It was not a Department of Energy that did that. A final charge is a general one leveled against not just Standard, but big companies in general. And that is that the big guy can charge any price he wants. Bigness in business is inherently bad because by sheer size, you have certain powers that other firms don't have, and that includes the power to charge and get any price that you want.